Hello everyone, how are you doing? I hope you are doing well. My name is Yusuf Al Qaidi. I'm a professor of English at the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, SAIS Fez, University Sidi Muhammad bin Abdullah Fez. I'm here today with a video on writing good news letters or writing good news messages in general. As you know, under the critical situation the world is undergoing and living in these days, I think the best news that we are all waiting for is, of course, the end of this pandemic and the end of the fears and the uncertainties associated with it. We are all in a state of limbo because of the lockdown, and I think every one of us is wondering, when shall this be over? Hopefully, this will be over soon, and the good news will be announced soon. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Writing good news letters or messages, that's my topic, and here, as you see, I have the outline, okay? So I'll start with an introduction in which I'll define what I mean by good news messages. I'll also give you some examples of the good news messages that we can write. And then I'll move to talk about the direct approach, which is recommended for writing good news messages. I'll also compare it to the indirect approach. After that, I have some samples of good news messages that I'm going to read for you if time allows me. Otherwise, I'll read just one example. And at the end, I have some writing prompts for you, okay? You read the prompts and you write good news messages accordingly and submit that as homework using our Google Classroom so that I can comment on it, okay? Now that's it, and let's get started now, all right? What is a good news message? A good news message is basically a message that is written to convey good news, okay? Or to convey information that will please the reader. Of course, good news messages are always pleasing to the reader. It goes without saying because it is a good news message. There are many kinds of good news messages that we can write, okay? Congratulatory messages, thank you messages, goodwill messages, recommendation messages, among others. Now, what is a congratulatory message? It is a message that is written to congratulate someone on his or her achievement, okay? Let me give you an example. You are the head of a certain business organization and you learned that one of your employees made an outstanding performance and a great achievement. In this case, you may decide to write a congratulatory message to your employee, congratulating him or her on his or her achievement and encouraging him or her to invest more efforts in the future. Congratulatory messages build goodwill and strengthen business relationships. That's why they're very important to write in the business world, okay? Thank you messages, we also call them appreciation messages, and we write thank you messages to thank someone, and this someone, by the way, could be a person or an organization. So we write thank you messages to thank them for something good they did to us, okay? Now, when we write a thank you message, we express our gratitude and our thankfulness, and of course, our appreciation for what that person or that organization did for us. Thank you messages convey positive attitude and make a good impact on the reader. Of course, when we get thanked, we like that, we appreciate that, and we feel that we can do more in the future for the person who thanked us. Goodwill messages. The actual purpose of writing a goodwill message is to form an excellent personal relation with the reader. Goodwill messages show a sense of kindness and friendliness. And this is perhaps why business organizations are keen on writing such kind of goodwill messages to their customers, to their partners, to their suppliers, and sometimes even to government agencies, because they want to strengthen and promote the business relationship with them. Recommendation messages or recommendation letters. A recommendation letter is written by a previous employer, colleague, client, teacher, or by someone else who can recommend an individual's work or academic performance. Let me give you an example. You are a recent graduate university graduate and you want to pursue your master's studies abroad, okay? Most universities abroad, they require at least two letters of recommendation, okay, to admit the student or the candidate. Now, here you may resort to your teachers to write you these recommendation messages in which they highlight your competencies, your qualifications, your skills, and your personal qualities that make you a very competitive candidate for the school or the college you are applying for. Now, all of these messages are, of course, um, good news messages or positive messages, and we need to write them implementing, of course, the direct approach. Okay? And when I say the direct approach, I mean that we should announce the good news immediately. Now, as you see in this illustration here, suppose that, for example, you have a message that is made up of 4 paragraphs. What should you do in the first paragraph if you are implementing the direct approach? In the first paragraph, you announce the good news. In the second paragraph, you give the details about the good news. And if you have additional details, you can mention them in the third paragraph. And at the end, you end with a positive tone. So this is like the structure of the content of a good news message, or how the content of a good news message should be organized. Now you might be asking, what is the difference between the direct approach or the direct strategy and the indirect strategy? And when do we use the direct strategy and the indirect strategy? So we use the direct strategy in the following situations, okay? Number one, if the receiver is going to be pleased by the news. So if the receiver is going to be pleased, announce the good news immediately and use the direct approach. If the receiver is somewhat interested in the news, okay? If the receiver is interested, not very much interested, but mildly interested. So in this case, you can still use the direct approach. If the receiver is neutral, right? The good news is neither going to please him nor to upset him. So in this case, you can still use the direct approach, okay? Now, as far as the indirect strategy or the indirect approach is concerned, we use it in the following situations. If the receiver is uninterested, the receiver doesn't want to hear or read the bad news, okay? If the bad news is displeasing, if it is going to displease the receiver, then we use the indirect strategy. If the bad news is disappointing and shocking, so in this case, use the indirect strategy. If you think that the receiver is going to react in a hostile way, in this case also, you should use the indirect strategy, okay? And when I say the indirect strategy, I mean that the bad news is kept until a later stage in the letter. We don't announce it immediately like in the direct strategy that we use with good news. We keep, I mean, the bad news until a later stage, and then we announce it. Now let me tell you how we formulate a message written using the indirect strategy. We start first with the buffer, and then we explain the reasons why the bad news was necessary to make, and then we announce the bad news. And at the end, we close with a positive tone, maybe by expressing empathy and sensitivity towards the reader. And in this case, we reduce the shocking effect of the bad news. All right, now here I have 2 examples of good news messages. One of them is an email, and the other is a letter. And as you see, this is a letter written according to the standards of the full blocks format style. Okay, we have the letterhead at the top. It is customized and printed on the stationery of the company. Then the date line, the inside address, the salutation, um, the subject line, and the body. And at the bottom, we have the complimentary close and the signature block. Okay. Now let me read you this letter. Okay. Dear Mr. Durante, you should receive by April the 26th a second shipment of the speakers, VCRs, headphones, and other digital equipment that you ordered April the 2nd. So as you see, in this opening paragraph, the writer announces the good news immediately. He doesn't wait until the second or the third paragraph. No, he announced the good news immediately. Now, of course, the writer is using the direct approach, and that's what he should do. In the second paragraph, the first shipment of this order was delivered April the 10th to 451 Main Street, Yonkers, New York. When no one at that address would accept the shipment, it was returned to us. Now that I have your letter, I see that the order should have been sent to 359 South Broadway Avenue, Yonkers, New York. When an order is undeliverable, we usually try to verify the shipping address by telephoning the customer. So it seems here that the writer is trying to regain the confidence of the customer by explaining what happened and by suggesting plans for improvement, okay? At the end, the writer closes confidently with genuine appeal for customers' respect. Your respect is important to us, Mr. Durante. Although our rock bottom discounted prices have enabled us to build a volume business, we don't want to be so large that we lose touch with valued customers like you. Over the years, our customers' respect has made us successful, and we hope that the prompt delivery of this shipment will retain yours. Now, apparently, it is very clear, it's very obvious that this letter here is an adjustment letter. And if you remember, an adjustment letter is a letter that is written in response to a claim or a complaint letter. And it is written to correct the wrong that was done to the customer. And this is the case of this letter. It is written to correct the wrong that is done to this customer, which is delivering his shipment to the wrong address. And now they are informing him that his shipment is on its way to his correct address. All right, now we still have some time. Now let's have a look at this one. It is an email. Hi folks, good news. You may now schedule teleconference meetings because we have hired Intercall to be our web conferencing provider. For those of you unfamiliar with running a web conference, here are a few guidelines. Now, as you see again here, the good news is announced at the very beginning, okay? And in the upcoming paragraphs, the writer of the email is making use of many graphic devices to clarify the details about his good news, okay? Like he's using bulletin, chunks, boldface, headings, etc. So as we said before, we can use any graphic devices that we have to guarantee the utmost clarity of our emails. Now, what is important, after all, when you write such kind of messages, is to implement the 7 principles we talked about in class, okay? Which are concreteness, clarity, courtesy, completeness, correctness, conciseness, and consideration. If you implement all of these principles, your message would be very, very well written, okay? So I want you to bear in mind, and I want you to have these principles in mind whenever you are writing business messages. Now, quickly at the end, I have some writing prompts for you, okay? The first one, you need to write a congratulatory message to a coworker who has been promoted to an assistant credit manager. Okay, write a congratulatory message congratulating him or her. And the second prompt, your manager, Mrs. Gray, has recommended you for a small select training program. Write a letter to Mrs. Gray expressing your appreciation for this opportunity. Of course, Mrs. Gray selected you out of a large pool of co-workers, okay? Now, this is an act to be appreciated, of course, and you need to write a thank you message or an appreciation message thanking your manager for selecting you to take part in this program, okay? Now, that's it for today's video. I hope it was clear, though it was very short, and see you in another video.